Welcome to Community Roundtable. I'm Nick Burns from the Salt Lake Community College Communication Department, and I'm your host as we explore topics of special interest and concern to the residents of the cities and to the unincorporated areas of Salt Lake County. Topics that are equally important, we feel, to the general public throughout all the state of Utah. And today on Community Roundtable, let's talk about higher education. The state of Utah aims for 2/3 of the population to have a degree or a certificate beyond the high school level. But the business college is full of buzzwords. There's pathways and stackable credits and credit for experience. And in this mix, Salt Lake Community College serves over 60,000 students. In addition to employing over 300 full-time faculty, 1,000 part-time faculty, and close to 800 full-time administration and staff. And today on the show, we'll take a look into Salt Lake Community College. We welcome as our guest, Provost Chris Picard. He came to higher education from a career in the Air Force. He's taught and served in administration at a number of different colleges across the United States, and he arrived here at Salt Lake Community College in 2010. Dr. Picard, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Provost Picard, as a place to jump in, what's a provost and where's that fit here at the community college?
Well, the term provost has an ancient origin, and I won't go into that because I'm told that I bore people when I do that. But on the other hand, I'm simply the chief academic officer at the college.
Okay, so you're like the vice president of the academic side.
I'm the vice president of the academic side.
So we've got a business vice president, like
a student services
okay.
vice president, and a vice president of government relations, and a vice president for institutional advancement and marketing.
And that arrangement's fairly typical for most colleges and universities.
There's some variations on the theme, but pretty typical.
Okay, and so here you are. You were in the Air Force in Germany and Korea?
I was in the Air Force for nearly 20 years.
Wow, okay.
I took an early out rather than go to the full 20 to retirement because it was offered to me, and I knew that my career would be in higher ed and not in the Air Force. And in fact, in the Air Force, I spent half of my time in higher ed at the Air Force Academy.
So you were teaching at the Air Force Academy?
I taught at the Air Force Academy in their English department.
Interesting. And so tell me, was a career in the military like a good setup for here at Salt Lake Community College, or does that military background kind of get in the way of getting things done here?
Personally, I think it was a good setup. There are a couple of things that I like to say in situations like this, that half of my career was very technical. My operational responsibilities within in the Air Force were aircraft maintenance.
Okay.
So I was responsible to supervise the crew chiefs and the technicians that repaired the aircraft for flight and loaded it up with the munitions. And in my case, the munitions were cameras. I served at recce units typically.
Oh, interesting.
So I had that technical experience on the one side, and then on the other side, my academic background is pretty traditional liberal arts background in English language and lit. And so you balance those two things out, and they reflect, I think, the mission of the community college, the technical instruction that we do on the one side, and then on the other side, the transfer instruction.
So you get it.
So
right?
I get it, yeah. And I appreciate the creativity and the mindset that goes into being a good technician. There's more to it than meets the eye in many people.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what about the side where here you are, you come from being what, a major or a lieutenant colonel?
I was a major. I left just prior to the lieutenant colonel's board.
So, there you had all these folks, you could just kind of tell people what to do. How's that play out in administration?
I don't know. You must have been associated with a different Air Force than I was. No one told the senior master sergeant what to do. You sought advice and you sought consensus with them in the same way that you seek advice and consensus from the faculty and staff at a community college. So really, in some ways, I don't know that management styles would differ all that much. I mean, it surprises people to hear me say that. Well, but there's the day-to-day Air Force, and then there's the combat operations. And when you're engaged in combat, then it's more bing, bang, boom. That's where you might issue an order and expect people to follow up on it. But in coming to grips with day-to-day operations, it's just like any other business or corporation, I think.
Okay. So here we have this notion of shared governance. That's the buzzword here at the community college. And yet, I've taught at a number of different 4-year and 2-year schools, and I think that shared governance is better here than at other schools. But at many places, there's this huge animosity between folks like yourself in administration and folks like me in faculty. And I wonder, what's your thoughts on how that shared governance is playing out here?
I think it's working well here. Frankly, in my tenure here, I have been blessed, and I mean absolutely blessed, with strong faculty leadership. In Jane Drexler currently, and Joe Gallegos. Before that, Jason Pickavance and Lisa Bickmore. They have, and Bob Burdett, all were astonishing faculty leaders. So first of all, you got to recognize that you're blessed with those faculty leaders. I think the second thing is, and just to put it informally, I want to be a good leader. I want to be a good manager of the institution. And I can't do that alone. I need the advice and help and consensus of those that I lead and those that I manage. And so why would I want not to ask their advice and consent?
Yeah. Okay.
So it's just a pragmatic thing for me in many respects. It's not a philosophy that I adhere to. It's simply a good way of going about doing business.
And it seems to work then.
And it works. Yeah.
You think you have their respect as well from faculty leadership?
I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so. I wouldn't want to speak for them on that, but
we'll have them on the show later. So I want to move on to the money side, because that seems to be one of the big issues with the whole economic crash. And this particular year, the Utah State Legislature was very good to higher education in Utah, and Salt Lake Community College was a huge beneficiary. But over the past decade, we've really seen state support here and elsewhere be pared back. And I wonder, what's that bode, do you think, for the future when we see overall the burden falling to students more and more for the cost?
Well, I think that's something that raises a very large philosophical issue for me. One way of thinking about it is, what is the public purpose of public higher ed? And, it's that public purpose that justifies the tax dollars that the legislature and others provide for us. Because if higher ed is only providing a private benefit to the individual student, it increases their employability, their remuneration in their jobs, and those sorts of things, then the question always comes up, why shouldn't the student simply pay for that then? They're getting the benefit, they should pay for it. In my mind, though, public higher ed does serve a public purpose, and we need to re-examine that and readdress that as higher ed. I believe that it improves the climate within the communities where it exists. It provides opportunities for people to engage culturally, to engage with diverse populations that they might not otherwise engage with. Being an old English instructor, I like to say too that it elevates the level of discourse within a community as well when higher ed is present and viable. And I think that is true of states, and I think that's true of the nation as well. An educated populace is, in my mind, to the benefit of the country, to the state, and to the community.
How do you think Salt Lake Community College itself is doing in terms of supporting that diversity that you're talking about?
Well, we are by far the most diverse institution within the state. Part of that is, frankly, just the service region that we engage with, Salt Lake City itself, which happens to be more diverse than the rest of the state. But I think we do very well at that. Okay. I think there's room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. We have not been as good at attracting and keeping our Hispanic students as we could and should be. But we're looking at it, we're working on it, and we're thinking about it.
Okay. This is Community Roundtable. When we come back, I want to ask Provost Picard about sort of some of the more specific strategic goals here at Salt Lake Community College. Keep it tuned. We'll be right back with more Community Roundtable. Very good. We are back on Community Roundtable talking about Salt Lake Community College with Provost Chris Picard. And you were just talking about this notion of education, public education, specifically higher education, as more than just a job, that there's a community benefit. But yet the trend seems to be in the opposite direction. There's this, students have to get jobs and students need to graduate, and how can we, and I wonder, how do you balance sort of your message with what I see as a push from many people in politics that's kind of the opposite of that civic goodwill of education?
Well, I think one way of addressing that, or one way of engaging in that conversation, is to say, I agree, first of all, that jobs are important, that part of the reason that we exist within higher ed and the mission that we serve is to put students into good jobs. Now, once the student is in a good job, what then? And I think the way in which we serve the public benefit is by producing an educated person, someone that has all of those skills around critical thinking and problem solving that we value as a nation. The creativity to come up with new product and to think about ways to expand the economic base. So it's not just about training somebody to do a specific job and getting them into that job. It is expanding the worldview of the students that we serve.
I mean, I've heard that, go ahead.
And I was going to say that, I was engaged in a conversation with an automotive faculty at one point. And, he made the comment, I don't teach ethics. And I said, well, certainly you do. If you think about it for just a second, you do teach ethics. You don't teach students to fix that automobile in a way that would lead to a further breakdown. You teach them how to do it right and to take the time and effort to do it right. That's an ethical response. And by engaging in that education, by engaging with that faculty member, that student has engaged in an ethical conversation as well. So education has benefits beyond simply the technical skills needed to do a specific job.
I mean, I've heard your college degree might get you your first job, but what you're talking about is what gets you the promotion or the next job.
The promotion, the next job makes you a better husband, makes you a better wife, makes you a better son or daughter, all of those things.
Yeah. And again, ethics, you wouldn't want to be teaching the automotive people to, spray oil on the alternator so that you can replace it when it's not broken. So another one of these buzzwords we hear about all the time is notions of pathways to completion. We see scheduling changing where the semester isn't always 16 weeks anymore. I'm teaching a class that's 10 weeks. I teach some that are 8. I wonder how you see pathways evolving and serving different students in different ways.
Well, one of the things that is currently under discussion is when you look at students, our student population is not at all homogeneous. I mean, we have 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, what most people would imagine is the traditional college-age student. But on the other hand, we have students that are fully employed. In fact, the vast majority of our students are employed, and the average number of work hours is 37. So most of our students are full-time employees somewhere. So they have to fit their education around their employment because they depend upon that employment to put food on the table and to put a roof over their head. So how do they do that? Well, we have to provide them different ways to access education. Short semesters, the 8-week semester or 8-week term, works very well for adult students. They can take one class at a time, or 2 classes at a time, but still complete 4 classes within the scope of a typical 16-week semester.
Okay, so that's one idea.
Yeah.
And we have online distance education, of course.
Online distance education, yeah.
So, meanwhile, I have to ask, because you said the majority of our students are working almost full-time jobs. I mean, I have some students that are working 3 jobs to try to go to school here. To me, that's insane. But nationally, we have this system that's created, over $1 trillion of student debt. In Utah alone, over half of all graduates owe over $20,000. And again, we're 45th in the nation. We're doing great. But
relatively speaking.
But still, that's $20,000 debt before you even have a job. More than $20,000 here on average. And I wonder, what are your thoughts on a system that asks so much of students while they're still supposed to go to class and have a job and maybe try and go on a date now and again?
Well, you have to cut out the dating.
Oh. Okay.
Well, it was interesting. Yesterday, the cabinet at the school was speaking with Senator Lee, and one of the points that we were trying to make is the absolute necessity of Pell Grants and other forms of student subsidy that allow a student the financial flexibility to attend college and not compromise their collegiate experience because their shift changed at work, or the 3,000 things where life intervenes. I think as a matter of national and public policy, we need to readdress how we think about subsidized education. Not only the state subsidy through state tax dollars, but also the Pell Grants and other forms of federal subsidy that offset some of that cost for students.
Okay. Here at the college in Utah, our funding system for higher education lumps all the institutions together. Mm-hmm. So when there is a public dollar, the University of Utah wants it, Dixie wants it, we want it. I wonder what your thoughts are, because other states don't fund community colleges like Utah does. Do you think we're at a disadvantage here?
Well, to some degree we are, although this is a relatively small system. With 7 institutions of higher ed, we're not competing with 30 other institutions for those tax dollars. We're just competing with 6 of our neighbors. One of the things I do have to say, though, is that the legislature in the last session and those that were informing the legislature, our leadership at the commissioner's office with Dave Buehler and others, did a great job in kind of parsing out those missions and saying, we really need to look at the community college because that's the place where the underrepresented populations gain their access to higher ed, keep the cost down for them. That's why it was such a bountiful year for us coming out of the legislature this year. They funded what was called acute equity.
So explain that.
Well, what that means is at a typical community college, about 60% of the college operating budget is tax dollar, and about 30 to 40% is tuition and other forms of financial aid. So having said that, they funded us in a way that pushed us closer to that ratio. We were close to 50-50, we're now closer to that 60-40.
And we were 70-30 only 15 or 20
years ago.
Yeah,
and so when you think about what that means, what that really means for the student is that we don't have to make those dramatic increases in tuition that you're seeing across higher ed, the 15 and 20 and 25% bumps each year.
Ouch.
Yeah, and that is a real ouch for students.
Ouch, yes. This is Community Roundtable, talking with Provost Chris Picard from Salt Lake Community College, talking about some of the issues that colleges are facing and students are facing. And when we come back, I want to ask sort of about some specifics in terms of strategic goals and policies right here at the community college. Keep it tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, very good. All right. We are back on Community Roundtable with Provost Chris Picard, talking about Salt Lake Community College. And I wanted to get into sort of the future a little bit. It's easy to talk about debt and it's easy to talk about what's going on now, but in terms of leadership as opposed to management, as you were saying earlier, we have this brand new Center for the Arts and Media. That's my area here at the college. We've got video, we've got film, dance, photography. It's all under one roof. And I wonder, we have this stunning new facility. What do you see as the future of sort of arts education for the college?
Oh, I think it will have a glorious future. We're entering into a couple of partnerships right now. Probably the most significant is the partnership that we're entering into with USU.
Okay.
Where our program will serve as a capstone for their programming in arts and media. We have a spectacular facility, as you pointed out, that can provide technical training in almost all of the support functions that are happening on the other side of the camera in this room. So I think it's got a glorious future. And I think the thing that we need to remember behind that is the traditional arts and communication. What you would think of typically as theater, music, and other things are all there too. They're the things that provide much of the content for those that is distributed through those technical means. So all of that, I think, will cohere and help support the state's economic development goals around arts and media as well, in terms of enticing some of the film companies to come here and shoot more films.
I mean, we have the tax write-offs and we have all kinds of deals, and I know the state was mighty disappointed that John Carter of Mars was such a flop because they wanted to shoot 2 more.
Yeah. Well, we won't talk about that.
No, but again, there is this bigger push. I mean, the Salt Lake community overall is huge for theater, right? But do you see the arts and media as being part of what you discussed earlier, this part of sort of well-rounded people that is, the arts education for people who don't want to become artists or technicians?
Well,
where's that fit?
If I could personalize it a little bit, looking back at my own life, one of the things that has always been extremely important to me on a personal level is music. One of my hobbies, I think we were talking about this before the show, is woodworking. But the reason that I got engaged in woodworking is I wanted to build a guitar. I thought I could do it better than the ones that I could buy in the store. I can't, by the way. But on the other hand, I went into woodworking with the idea of building a guitar. And even though I would never even presume to say I come even close to being a professional musician, just last night I'm sitting in the living room and I'm playing the guitar, much to my wife's chagrin. But I think music, art, theater, all enrich our lives. I mean, they make our lives something more than simply drudgery.
Okay.
I mean, they are the sparkle often. For those of us that aren't professionals in those areas, can you imagine a world without it? It's just hard for me to imagine.
And yet it gets cut all the time, right? We're going to cut the teachers and we're going to cut the arts program, and we can't afford that.
Well, it's always seen, or sometimes seen, as sort of ancillary to the core mission of let's train for jobs.
Right.
But when you start to think about what makes our life worth living, the arts are a significant part of that. Can you imagine your life without storytelling and the means of looking at those stories either through film or through television? Even if you're not an habitué of cinema in the highest form, I will bet you everyone has watched a movie over the last week, and that movie in some ways or another has influenced the way you think about the world. It's enlarged it or entertained you at the very least.
Yeah. Well, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, who doesn't narratize their life every single day? So we've only got a couple minutes left, and I wanted to ask about faculty compensation, because that's been a huge issue here, that traditionally faculty have been paid more like high school teachers, but I think you have a plan to pay faculty here more like faculty are compensated at colleges and universities. So take me through that.
Well, this is one of the things that I've worked very closely with Jane Drexler and Joe Gallegos and others in terms of developing a compensation scheme that is much more like a state university. Looking at, I call it the 3-tiered, but it's really assistant, associate, and professor. Having those promotions based on merit, having those promotions remunerated. So one of the challenges that we have right now with the faculty scale and the way that it's set up is that most of our faculty are stagnate on that scale. It's been very difficult to move faculty on it. And so this will give our best and most productive faculty the opportunity to move up the scale through those promotions. So I've been very supportive of that, and I think Jane and Joe have been supportive of it as well.
I mean, that's another good example of shared governance working.
It is, yeah. I will say that there are 3,468, maybe 4,369 details that need to be worked out. But there's goodwill around working out those details and trying to achieve a common goal of recognizing excellence within our faculty.
Okay, very good. So we've only got about 2 minutes left, but I wanted to ask real quickly about Governor Herbert's 2020 goal of 2/3 of folks in Utah with some sort of certificate. What would you like to see have happen to make that goal happen?
I think a couple of things. Going back to your very initial question about my experience in the Air Force, one of the things that I would say is that we need to recognize the viability, the creativity, and the life enhancement that a technical certification can provide. I think too often our secondary systems are focused too narrowly on getting students to one of the baccalaureate granting institutions without considering that many of those students may prefer and may find a useful and happy life with a technical certification of one sort or another. And frankly, that's where the jobs are emerging right now. So I would encourage us to think about those certifications in different ways as something that would enhance the economic viability of the state, but also enhance the lives of our students.
So 30 seconds, what's next for you?
Boy, I don't know.
Besides playing guitar and trying to build one.
Well, I think the next thing for me is to see through some of the projects that we've got on the books right now and keep trying to make Salt Lake Community College the premier, trying to make it. It is the premier community college. Let's stay there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us on Community Roundtable. If you have a comment, if you have a question, maybe you have an idea for a future show, get in touch with us. Our email address, roundtable@slcctv.com. Don't forget, you can catch all the episodes archived, podcast them, take them with you, slcctv.com. I'm Nick Burns. Keep it tuned. SLCC TV.